Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. We are from Group 14. We'll present our topic, which is the Keynesian School. Before we start, I would like to introduce my group member, which is Farzia binti Nuljari, Fatin Najwa binti Muhammad Zaki, Felicia anak Dorao, Feni Linsia Erisa Surang, and Viviana binti Hussein.
The school began with the publications of Keynes' The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money in 1936, and this book remains a major presence in orthodox economics today. Keynesian economics became the dominant school of macroeconomics of the 1950, 1960, and early 1970. It arose out of the neoclassical school, and Keynes brings step in the Magellan's tradition. Although Keynes sharply criticized certain aspects of neoclassical economics, which he lumped together with Ricardian doctrine under the heading of classical economics, but he used many of its postulates and methods. His system was based on a subjective psychological approach, and it was permanent with marginalist concept, it including statistic equilibrium economy. Keynesian economics is a variety of macroeconomics theory. It is about how the short-term enduring recessions as well as economic output are strongly influenced by aggregate demand. So, Keynesian economics is a theory of total spending in the economy and its effect on output and inflation. The Great Depressions of the 1930s was a driving force toward the acceptance of Keynes' idea. The roots of his idea can be traced back to before 1929 with the work of many economists like Wesley Clair Michel and his associate in the National Bureau of Economics Research. So, their work was within the framework of the aggregate economy or macroeconomics rather than microeconomics of the neoclassical school. Keynesian economists generally argue that when aggregate demand is volatile and unstable, market economies will often experience inefficient macroeconomics outcome in the form of economic recessions and inflation. World War I required an overall view of the economy. The growth of large-scale industrial productions and trade made the economy more susceptible to statistical measurement and control. So, using the Keynesian approach will become more eager for the government to deal actively with unemployment. After 1930s, many economists in the United States advocated policies later known as Keynesian. Many economists were aware of the multiplier effect that increased government spending could have on total spending and income. Wages were recognized as a source of demand for goods as well as on cost of production, and cutting wages was frequently opposed as providing no real. Interestingly, these policies were presented before publication of Keynes' The General Theory, but it was Keynes who provided the analytical framework that integrate this idea and touch of the Keynesian revolution in economy. So, Keynes also advocated for increased government expenditure and lower tax to stimulate demand and pull the global economy out of the depression. Keynesian economics was used to refer to the concept that optimal economic performance could be achieved and economic slump be prevented. So, the theory of Keynesian economics is one that believes in the idea that total spending is really important for keeping an economy thriving, with total spending being referred to as aggregate demand.
The first major tenet in Keynesian School is aggregate demand. The aggregate demand during the Keynesian School is influenced by a host of economic decisions. The economic decisions, including public and private decisions, but sometimes both will behave erratically. The public decisions will include most prominently those who own monetary and fiscal such as taxes. These public decisions were aimed to achieve full employment and price stability. On the other hand, the private decisions lead to adverse macroeconomic outcomes. The Keynesians were arguing that monetary policies is powerless. Meanwhile, some monetarists arguing that some fiscal policies is powerless. Hence, Keynesian economists ended up supporting a mixed economy which guided by the private sector but partly operated by the government. The second major tenet is price and wage rigidity. Keynesians believe that both price and wages respond slowly to changes in supply and demand, resulting in periodic shortage and surplus, especially in labor. He pointed out that wages tend to be inflexible downward due to a few factors such as union contracts, minimum wage laws, and implicit contracts. On the other hand, Keynesians also say that price also sticky downward by declining in effective demand initially, cost reduction in both output and employment. The next major tenet is Keynesians do not think that typical level of unemployment is ideal. He didn't think that the typical level of unemployment is ideal due to the unemployment itself, which is subject to caprice of aggregate demand, and they also believe that price adjusts only gradually. In this school, typically, he sees unemployment as both too high on average and too variable, even though he knows that rigorous theoretical justification for this position hard to come by. Keynesians as well feel that certain periods of recessions or depression or economic maladies will not effectively market response to unattractive opportunities. The next major tenet is active fiscal and monetary policies. Keynesians advocate activity stabilization policy. The main objective is to reduce the amplitude of the business cycle by ranking among the most important of all economic problems. Keynesian economists also recommend the government intervene actively in fiscal and monetary policies in order to promote full employment, price stability, and economic growth. To reduce the amplitude of business cycle, Keynesians advocate to use fine-tuning, which the government increase its spendings or reduce their taxes. On the other hand, government also should increase the money supply every month in order to drive down the interest rate, in the hope that by doing this will bolster the investment spending. To overcome the counter-inflation, which is caused by the excessive aggregate expenditures, the government should reduce their own spending, increasing taxes in order to reduce their private consumption spending. The government also can reduce the money supply to raise interest rate, which will affect the excessive investment spending. The last major tenet in this school is instability in economy. Based on Keynesian words, economy is given to recurring booms and busts due to its level of planned investment spending is erratic. Changes in investment plans to change by the amount greater than the initial changes in investment is caused by the national income and output. Following, the rate of interest and the marginal efficiency of capital is determined jointly the investment spending. The interest rate is really on the pupil's preference for liquidity and the quantity of money. Meanwhile, the marginal efficiency of capital is rely on the expectation of future profits and the supply of capital.
The success of the decline economic depressions and employment was a great success for the Keynesian economy. So the school offers something for almost everyone. What has been done because of need. So the government activity participate in the economic benefit society, where when the government increase, it is spending. So the spending is for infrastructure, education development, and unemployment benefits. So this can be used by all communities while maintaining full employment. The community also benefit from full employment. So the most promoted Keynesian School economic benefit is the higher level of employment supported by the economic model. People will reduce spending when there is reductions in employment, because people will reduce consumer demand. The consumer demand for product and service. Next is labor is the benefit all through. They sometimes object to creating Keynesian proposal. This is because increasing credit demand for the labor market and trade unions without fear of employment to negotiate increase and working conditions. So the Keynesian economic theory during the recession insisted that the government needs to increase its spending on social program in order to stimulate the job. The productive employment without significantly increasing costs as an increase in the backlog of skilled labor will result is lower wage and reduce cost. So the last is farms heavily dependent on agriculture. So the government help in agriculture this spending program the farm. So in order to increase farm income, they depends the government in interventions by claiming the cash dollar received by a farm could generate $7 in nation income, which is through re-expenditure increase farms. This is because farms have long supported simple monetary policy and low interest. The fact there is spokesperson have said the theory that is was about multiples long before it was incorporated into the Keynesian system, because them to play on government spending program for agriculture. So the consumer expect tax cut and supported politicians who process and vote from them in the 1916.
Now, I will continue with how was the Keynesian School valid, useful or correct in its time. The theories put forward by this school are very appropriate and very useful at the time. Keynes described the fluctuation and devised a strategy to deal with it. The principles laid down by the school were originally from the thinking of neoclassical figures, but were changed according to their own suitability. When the school put forward new theories, many people agree with his views. The theories from Keynesian School that still used until today is liquidity theory and money quantity theory. The first one is liquidity theory and also known as liquidity trap. In general, a liquidity trap is a situation when interest rates have reached their lowest level and will not fall again, thus causing bond prices to reach their highest level. The public will decide to sell all the bonds and hold liquidity. The liquidity trap is marked by the failure of cash injections by central banks into the private banking system to lower interest rates. The liquidity trap is that fluctuation in the money supply failed to cause fluctuations in price levels due to people's behavior. The next theory is money demand theory. According to Keynesian theory, demand for money means that society holds cash. People ask for money for three purposes. The first one is for vigilance, the second one is for transactions, and the third one is for speculation. So, for the first one is for vigilance. According to Keynes, money is requested for savings purposes so that it can be used in times of emergency or unexpected. It depends on the income of the individual. The second one is for transaction. Money is used to solicit funds for daily expenses such as goods and services. It demonstrates how money functions as a medium of exchange. It also depends on the individual's income. And the last one is for speculation. Money is requested for the purpose of profiting from the purchase of bonds. The process of speculation entails purchasing bonds at a low price and selling them at a high price. According to Keynes, when someone buys a bond, he or she is betting that interest rates will not rise too much during the time the bond is held. If he believes that the interest rate will rise, it is better to keep a cash balance that pays no interest. Thank you.
For the next topic, I'm going to be presenting about which tenets of the school became lasting contributions. As we all know, the general theory of employment, interest, and money that was published in 1936 has remained a major presence in orthodox economics today. This classical theory of employment consists of two fundamental postulates, which is the wage is equal to the marginal product of labor, and the second one is the utility of the wage when a given volume of labor is employed is equal to the marginal disutility of that amount of employment. These two postulates determine the volume of employed resources. First one, it gives the demand schedule for employment, and the second one, it gives us the supply schedule and the amount of employment fixed at the point where the utility of the marginal product balances the disutility of the marginal. Keynes also suggests that a reduction in wage rates will not reduce unemployment. Instead, the way to reduce unemployment is by increasing government spending and running a budget deficit. Keynesian School also taught us to understand about how competitive market function. This is a system where the supply and demand for goods and services largely determines, and we can know about what is produced, how it's to be produced, how much is produced, how the output is to be distributed, and how the economy accommodates change. If there was no competition in the markets, companies would neglect the technological development and cost reduction efforts. Keynes concepts such as consumption function, the marginal propensity to consume, the saving function, and many more are now become the standard for economics textbook. Consumption function is an economic formula that represents the functional relationship between total consumption and gross national income. This concept suggests consumer spending is determined by income and the changes in income. Meanwhile, the average propensity is to consume out of current incomes is usually thought to be higher for low-income families than for high-income families. For example, families in the lowest income may be forced to go into debt merely to provide themselves with basic necessities, where the same necessities require a much smaller proportion of high incomes. Lastly, Keynes also taught us to understand about the saving function. Keynes says about saving function at very low levels of income as well as at zero income. Since consumption is positive, saving must be negative. As income increases, this saving vanishes and saving becomes positive.
John Maynard Keynes is a British economist well known as the father of the one who is behind of Keynesian economics. Keynes' career included academic roles and government service. He was born on 5th June 1883 in Cambridge in a well-academic family. His father was an economist and a philosopher. Meanwhile, his mother is the town's first female mayor. He attended King's College, Cambridge, where he graduated as a degree student in mathematics in 1995. After graduate, he stayed there for another year to study under an economist which is Alfred Marshall and Arthur Pigou. He married to Lydia Lopokova in 1925 and died on April 21, 1946, survived by his father, John Neville Keynes, also as a renowned economic in his day. Moving on to the Keynes contribution. After Keynes left Cambridge, he took a position with the civil service in Britain. In Britain, he collected the material regarding his first book on economic, which is Indian Currency and Finance. In this book, he describes the workings of India's monetary system. In 1998, he returned to Cambridge not as a student but as a lecturer. Then, he took a leave absence to work for the British Treasury. Sadly, he resigned because he thought the Treaty of Versailles was overly burdensome for the Germans. His contribution toward the economic is by his eloquent book, The Economic Consequences of the Peace, was published in 1990. Keynes' book does not contain an excellent economic analysis of reparation, but also contains an insightful analysis of the Council of Four. Keynes was a believer in the quantity theory of money, which called monetarism nowadays. In 1923, Keynes wrote another masterpiece called Tract on Monetary Reform and published Treatise on Money right after. These two books were both on monetary policy. Keynes' major policy is that the government's central bank must lower interest rates when prices tend to rise, and raise them when the prices were tend to fall. Keynes also gives out ideas about unemployment and investment. As in employment, he investigated the other cause of Britain's economic woes and found the result, which is the general theory of employment, interest, and money. As for investment, his work General Theory revolutionized the way economists think about economics. It was path-breaking due to its investment and government spending, and because it showed that full employment could be maintained only with the help of government spending. His thought about cost high unemployment makes some economists argue. Therefore, Keynes' original work survived even in this modern economic theory. His idea has been endlessly revised, expanded, and critiqued.
As a conclusion, Keynesian economics is a macroeconomic theory of total spending in the economy and its effect on output, employment, and inflation. John has advocated for increased government expenditures and lower taxes to stimulate demand and pull the global economy out of the depression. Keynes also argued that if economic downturn sets in, the fear and gloom that it engenders among businesses and investors will tend to become self-fulfilling and lead to a sustained period of depressed economic activity and unemployment. Secondly, he also argued that economies does not stabilize themselves very quickly and require active intervention that boosts short-term demand in the economy. He also argued that prices also do not react quickly and only gradually change when monetary policy interventions are made. So as for Keynes' conclusion for this case, lowering interest rates is one way governments can meaningfully intervene in economic system by encouraging consumption and investment spending. Short-term demand that was also introduced by Keynes will also increases initiated by interest rate cuts reinvigorate the economic system can restore employment and demand for services, then feeds continued growth and employment. That is all from me. Thank you.